Hello, thank you for watching another episode of DiResta's Cut. Today I'm going to make a piece inspired by this piece designed by Paul Evans. And here I am in my garage upstate, and I'm starting out by making the face frame. I'm making a vague copy, it's not going to be an exact duplicate. And I'm only guessing from those two photographs exactly how this piece was made. And here I'm starting with some 3/4 inch poplar. My overall height is going to be 28, and minus the top and bottom rails, that leaves me with about 23 3/8 for the verticals that go in between the top and bottom rails that will make up the face frame of this unit. And there I am just chopping the pieces to a preset length. And now this is the full top and bottom rails. And now this is an interesting problem I always have, is exactly how to divide up a space. If I have 5 uprights and 4 open spaces, how do you make them even? And the way I do it is I just have little representations of the upright rails, add them all together, measure what's left over, and then divide that by how many spaces I need, which is 4. And so I do some quick math here, just kind of graphically to show everybody what I'm doing. And 72.5 divided by 4 gives me 18 1/8. So every opening of the 4 openings will be 18 1/8. And again, I always use scraps of the actual dimensions instead of relying on the ruler, because I never read the ruler right. Here I am using a Craig jig, and those are just 2 of the small Craig jigs they kind of sell for like on the job Craig jigging, and I keep them upstate. And if you do use a Craig jig, make sure that you use a screw clamp like that. It comes with the vice grip to kind of overcome that, but I think the screw clamp works better in this instance, because you can grab the piece top and bottom parallel, and it gives a much better grip. This tailor in the background working on a chandelier, and just making sure all my pieces are here in order. Paul Evans is a pretty amazing furniture designer. I don't know much about him other than what I found out online. My friend's family owns a few pieces of his, and he's been talking about him for a while. And this particular design is something that my friend wanted, inspired by. Like I said, it's not an exact duplicate, but it was interesting for me to put my head inside the mind of another designer and exactly what he was thinking. The basic cabinet itself, as you can see here, is pretty basic. It's not too elaborate. It's the doors that are very specialized. So here you see I made the top and bottom of this cabinet out of 3/4 inch plywood. Here I'm cutting 1/2 inch plywood, just using the track saw to give me some parallel cuts and some perpendicular cuts. And now here I need to dado. So I'm dadoing the 3/4 inch top and bottom, and the 1/2 inch sides are going to be trapped by the top and the bottom. And you'll notice here on the table I just put some screw bosses down on the table, and I use that shim just to wedge things into place to hold them while I simply put a dado. And if you notice my little router jig there, I have an actual 3/4 inch piece screwed to the bottom, which becomes my fence and also keeps me level and flat and perpendicular to the surface I'm routering into, because that's 3/4 and so is the piece I'm cutting. And now here I'm putting a dado in the back, which is going to accept the back panel, which is going to be a piece of 1/2 inch MDF. And just to alleviate the pressure, I just take little bites out of it, because I don't want to burn the router out. And I use those big heavy steel weights to keep my material in place. And now I'm going to dado across those 2 pieces to accept what are going to be dividers inside of the cabinet. And I put them side by side, because I want that dado to go directly through them as if they're one piece. But one is the top and one is the bottom. By dadoing them at the exact same time, it assures me that they're going to be opposite each other and perfectly perpendicular in space to the unit. And you see I'm just using some scrap wood with some finishing nails nailed in place to keep it where I want. The router now has that piece of wood that was on it a moment ago with another piece, just so that I could run it between parallels. And the width of that whole thing is just random. It's exactly where I want the dado, which is the most important thing. And now I remove all those bosses, which just kept the wood clamped to the table. And now I have my top and bottom 3/4 prepared. And into those dados I will glue 1/2" side panels. Now the whole thing gets a face frame. I just wanted the girth of the bottom to be strong enough to support the whole unit, and the girth of the top to be strong enough to feel sturdy when you put a glass or put something down on top of it. I don't want it to sound hollow. And the sides being thin the way they are, it was really just a matter of the material I had. I had a sheet of 1/2" and a sheet of 3/4. And so I just chose to assemble them this way. And now here I'm putting in the dividers. And you'll notice it's still flexible, so I could pop them into place with glue on them. And the center divider of this cabinet is going to carry some equipment, stereo equipment, and you'll notice the dado in the back there. Now me and my friend Jacob are putting the back panel in, which is just a 1/2" MDF, and it fits perfectly into place. Put a little bit of glue and some nails. It's not going anywhere. And there you have it. We flip it over. Now we're going to put the face frame on. I went through a little bit of a decision-making process here. I was going to use my domino joiner. The plywood was a little bent, and I was having a hard time keeping it straight. And so I just straight up nailed it in. And then I'm drilling pilot holes, and Jacob's following me with screws. It's something funny when you work on a product that you know is going to be completely painted. It's a certain type of relief as a woodworker who makes money building things for a living. If it's going to be painted, you can approach it a completely different way. If it's going to be made in hardwood, you have to approach it. If it's made in hardwood, you have to approach it a different way. And the painted way is sometimes the easier way. Now here I'm cutting a hard maple, which is going to become the door details. Now if you remember that sculpture in the beginning, or that sculptural cabinet in the beginning, we're copying that to some extent. And each one of those doors, the original I believe is made in steel. And obviously I'm not doing that here, I'm making it in wood. But there's this very abstract graphic on the front of each door, and it's funny, again, getting inside the head of the artist, thinking the graphic is abstract and random, but when you have to copy it, you start to notice how planned it really is. There's a very specific sense of balance between each door related to the next door, and the lines and the amount of color in each door is very balanced. The amount of thin lines versus thick lines is very balanced, the negative space. And so it's funny, I learned a little lesson. And here's a time lapse of me installing those graphic lines in wood. Again, the original sculpture I think is made in steel. I can't really find too much information on this exact piece. And now I'm making the base. This is going to be the piece of structure, or this is going to be the structure that carries the bottom, and I'm making it out of 6 legs because my friend's going to put some heavy equipment in here. And now that screw clamp is perpendicular to my sanding plate there, so by spinning it I get it nice and perpendicular and flat. This is going to be the little apron that's going to carry those 6 legs in place. Just tack weld, and then I tack weld, and then I give it a full weld, and I'm welding everything from the inside so I don't have to do any cleanup on the exterior. So I'm carefully planning and making sure that everything is centered on top of that leg rod there. And my thing was twisted. You'll notice I pull it in place. Now here, this is going to be the center leg. You notice I split that. Took some time on the sander and the bandsaw. And so now I have a split leg in the back and a split leg in the front. So there is my base. As time goes on, I put in some screw bosses to keep it in the bottom, and you'll notice that when I install it later. Now getting back to the doors here, I'm putting some gel medium on the doors. This is just to seal them, give them a little bit of texture. The original doors had lots and lots of texture. I'm just going to kind of go at it here with acrylic paints, and this isn't something that I typically do, but it was really good exercise for me to loosen up and just have fun. And I'm looking at the picture on my phone there, and I'm going at it with each color. So each different hue, I'm trying to put them in the different spaces where they belong, and like I said, you'll notice that there's a very specific balance of the various colors and negative spaces. So it was interesting. When you first look at it, it just looks like chaos, but in fact it's quite planned out chaos. Now all those raised edges sort of have like a little bit of a white accent on them. Okay, freeze frame this and read that. This is the Presto Black that everybody's always asking me about. Presto Black by Birchwood Technologies will make your metal black. And there you see the transformation of that raw steel going from unfinished steel to black. And there's a little bit of a process. You got to let that soak on to very clean steel. And then I sprayed some distilled water on there. It stops the process. And then once it dries, it rusts a little bit. So I'm going at it with a soft Scotch-Brite. And then that is Permalac. And I'll show that again in a minute on camera. You'll get a freeze frame of it. And so while one process is drying, I move on to a different process. And here I am beginning to paint the cabinet itself. Instead of actually primering it, I just gave it several coats of the actual color. And the colors, I find, were very layered. So I start with a base of gold, and then I rub some watery brown on it. And then I rub a little black on it and give it all these multiple tones. And then ultimately, all of this was covered with a few coats of water-based poly, a satin finish. And I didn't worry too much about the interior of the cabinet. This was, my buddy wants to put some electrical equipment in it, so we're not exactly sure how we're going to do the interior, not until we get it in his apartment. Do I know exactly how the interior is going to be planned out? There you see me putting the bottom on, and you can't see the screw bosses, but I just welded some little angle iron with holes in them. You can see right there at the bottom of the screen right there. And those are just angle irons with holes in them. I put about 2 on each section. And now I have to make the hinges for these doors. These doors are 1 1/4 inch thick, and there was nothing existing at the hardware store that I could use to make hinges. And so here you see me starting with a 1 1/2 inch square tube on the exterior. It's about 1 1/4 interior. And I have a piece of wood that represents the height of the door. And this way I'm getting rid of all the excess material, exactly where it needs to be. And now this represents what's left over on the face frame. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I have 1 1/4 inch piece giving me a guide, and then a 3/4 inch piece giving me a guide. So all those L shapes. And then I need 4 in one direction and 4 in the other direction. So I have to keep all my pieces organized. And I'm sanding them now. I give everything a little bit of a rounded off corner. And you'll see. So now these are my 4 sets of hinges, top and bottom. And now I drill all my holes. I have a little jig there. They're all drilled at the same distance from the bend. Now I'm drilling the holes that are actually going to accept the screws to the face frame. And I countersink each one of those. There's the countersink. Clean those up on the sander again, get rid of all the burrs, and then I give it a little bath of Presto Birchwood Blackener. And then I let that dry, wash them off, and again there's that Permalac can. That's a good lacquer spray. Use that in a well ventilated area. But that's what I sprayed on my bench that I built that's out in front of my shop, and it's incredible. It still hasn't rusted. And here you see where and how the hinges get installed. And you see the reason why, because the doors were thick, I wanted them to open up and away from the face frame. And so there I am, just putting some screws in. I'm using some wooden spacers that are cut for the very specific distance around the face frame. So that's what that scrap of wood is in my hand. I'm just keep checking to make sure everything's parallel, the same distance. And I epoxied the hinges in place right there very quickly. And it gave them about an hour to dry. And once the epoxy was dry, I put some screws in. Now here I am just touching up my images on the front, and again it looks similar. It wasn't a quite exact duplicate of the Paul Evans piece, which I don't think I could make a perfect exact duplicate of it because it was so involved, and again it's a very personal piece to him, and so this is just sort of an homage to him. And there's the finished piece. I put some shelves inside with spacers. I didn't put pins, and here is a couple beauty shots. And something with this much texture and this much color, it changes literally from minute to minute how you light it, how you look at it, the shadows on it. So it's actually a pretty beautiful and it is inspiring to me for my own personal work. So this kind of opened me up a little bit. It's nice to copy a artist that inspires you from time to time. Gives you a new perspective. So thank you, Paul Evans, for the inspiration.